For the U.S. track legend George Strait, tune is not the entirety. The successful U.S. musician became at the verge of dropping his tune career so he could recognition on his spouse, Norma Strait. Norma has performed a key element in George's career and is regularly the quiet force for calm and motive in his career. She has continually been there for him, even performing in the music video of his tune, Código. However, now George has to be there for Norma because the echoes of a shared loss weighs on Norma's coronary heart. George Strait and his spouse met whilst he turned into an excessive faculty, however they were not speak me but. They saw each different round, but that became it. Maybe George changed into holding return due to the fact he was busy and couldn't devote. His father, John Byron Strait SR, changed into a junior excessive faculty arithmetic instructor who owned a 2,000-acre cattle ranch outside of Big Wells, Texas. So George's weekend was typically serious about working at the livestock ranch. During summer, George worked every day on the ranch and he enjoyed it. However, someday he asked Norma out on a date. George determined her certainly pretty and even defined her as hot. Even at that, after that one date, he did not see her for a long time. George had ended up distracted by using the motions of existence, but became there every other reason for his refusal to commit to Norma. When he was within the 4th grade, his mother and father divorced, and this brought about his own family splitting up. His sister, Pensy, went to stay with his mother whilst him and his brother, John Buddy Jr., stayed together with his father. Him and his brother, Buddy, and his father persisted to paintings on his farm. However, George felt that something became missing in his existence. While he did not see Norma once more, his mind changed into nonetheless on her. So he went to her again, and they began thus far whilst they were in Pearsall High School, which they each attended. Speaking of excessive faculty, it wasn't best romance that George was pursuing. As a lot as he loved operating on the ranch and loving existence as a cowboy roper, something else known as George's interest, tune, George loved track, and he desired to be a musician. Contrary to the legendary figure he currently is as a rustic musician, George's first style of track became rock and roll. Like many younger Americans on the time, George became also stuck up in the British invasion era rock craze. When he became in Pearsall High School, he joined a tune institution, the Stoics, and drew most in their thought from the Beatles and other British artists. While the British invasion technology rock drew massive followership, George's selection to select that style turned into exciting thinking about how huge of a tune become in Texas. He became to this point removed from United States music so much so that he didn't pay attention to it at the radio, who prefer Farmer's record alternatively. He followed any place rock and roll track led him and executed for numerous different businesses, however something modified. George, in the end, listened to United States of America track by means of watching a stay overall performance, and their performance led to him viewing extra USA track stay performances, so his track pastimes changed. He caught the US tune computer virus and often began to listen to the likes of Frank Sinatra, Hank Thompson, Lefty Frizzle, Merle Haggard, George Jones, Bob Wills, and Hank Williams. Finally, with the choice of style in hand, George seemed on the adventure to life as an expert musician, but he didn't have the entirety he needed but. After the initial on and stale dating he had with Norma, George was prepared to take things to the subsequent level. And what he did not next may be taken into consideration as romantic or simply undeniable crazy, or maybe a touch bit of both. He eloped with Norma to Mexico after their excessive school commencement, and that they got married there on December 4th, 1971. It became them in opposition to the arena, and George loved the odds. After the two were given married, George and Norma again to Pearsall and had a church wedding. Their union turned into something that regarded straight out of a romance novel, however the tragedy that took place them after became something even the maximum bloodless-hearted author would not be eager to put in writing. The loss that might wreck Norma and George became coming, but at that time they enjoyed their non-violent lifestyles. George's passion wasn't only for his wife, USA tune and cowboy roping, he loved America, and when the time came for him to enlist, in 1971 he did so without fear. He turned into keen to serve and do his bit for America. Strait have become an infantryman and posted to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. After he changed into posted to Hawaii, Norma joined him and the two began to stay as a pair. Then on October 6, 1972, they have become a circle of relatives when his spouse gave birth to their daughter, Jennifer. George now had everything he ever wanted. Well, now not the whole thing, however he quickly fixed that. George maintained his passion for song. And while impossibility came for him to carry out, he took the opportunity with all of his might. He auditioned for an Army-subsidized USA music band, Rambling Country, and were given in. The band played each on the bass and scale at 2. Life became good for George and Norma. Nothing organized them for the tragedy that loomed. George left the Army in 1975 as a corporal and right now went to Texas State University to look at agriculture. It wasn't a shocking preference considering he had been running on a ranch all his lifestyles, however why failed to he pick tune alternatively? While George did not examine music, he never left it alone. At Texas State University, George noticed a flyer that USA band Stony Ridge posted across the campus. They wanted a brand new vocalist, and Strait right now auditioned and joined them. He even have become an outstanding member of the band as he modified their call to the ace inside the whole band. The band done around Texas, normally in honky-tonks and bars. And shortly they commenced to come to be popular within the vicinity and open for countrywide acts inclusive of the Texas Playboys and Asleep at the Wheel. As their nearby reputation grew, unbiased label D-Record, which turned into primarily based in Houston, provided the band the risk to report singles. It changed into a great opportunity for them, and Strait wrote the songs, however lamentably the songs didn't hit. Strait turned into getting annoyed now, but Norma kept on encouraging him. To make ends meet, Strait endured to paintings on his father's farm animals ranch at some point of the day to make money his family wished. With the songs which they recorded with D-Record failing, George lost connections to the recording enterprise. Still, he and his band endured to carry out with exceptional passion. Their passion led them to Irv Woolsey, who George had become pals with. Woolsey, who managed one of the bars which George's band played. Woolsey had worked for predominant label MCA Information. Woolsey started to speak to the human beings he knew approximately George and his band. These people came and they loved George and his band, however they weren't convinced his musical style would appeal to the broader marketplace. What was this style that brought about his rejection? Keep watching to discover. George felt beaten, however this wasn't the time for him to give up. He picked himself up and started out to try harder. George traveled to Nashville in pursuit of achievement, but nothing came for him. He went from one studio to every other and got rejected through every one of them. The disappointments chipped away at his self-belief, and shortly George was achieved. He needed to offer for his wife and youngsters, and if track wouldn't be the way, he would do something else. In between the disappointments in his tune profession, George got a proposal to design cattle pens for a ranch. It became a familiar task, not one he changed into eager for, but one he needed to do. George told the band that he was going to quit and prefer that his goals of being a massive musician changed into going to die. Norma wasn't happy. She knew that her husband wasn't passionate about making livestock pens, and she didn't want to be the cause he would cease track. So she called him for a coronary heart to coronary discussion and asked him to present Tune a shot for one more year. George didn't need to break Norma's heart. He cherished her too much to do this to her. So he agreed to do song for one more 12 months. It became precise fortune for him that he listened to Norma due to the fact, in 1981, MCA signed George to a recording settlement. However, there has been a seize. George had most effective one risk with them. If his tune did nicely, they would think about making an album. That one chance was what George wanted. Taking his band at the side of him as backup, George launched Unwound, his first unmarried for MCA Records, and it did vastly well. The tune reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs, and that was sufficient for an album. George launched his first album, Straight Country, and preferred that he have become the freshest new element on the block. His sound turned into Taken Into Consideration clean. Exchange from the pop encouraged United States of America track that ruled the song industry on the time. George's sound became seen as the brand new traditional US of a style. The sound paired properly with his actual cowboy photograph and became praised for returning us of a song to its roots. From that album, George solidified himself as one of the Enterprise's brightest stars. However, even the brightest stars dimmed. The achievement of his first album and single weren't the only top matters that passed off to George in 1981. His wife Norma additionally gave beginning to their 2D toddler, his son, George Bubba Strait Jr. In 1982, George were given greater success hitting the primary single of his profession with the song Fool-Hearted Memory, and he turned into just getting commenced. Another of his songs, Amarillo by Using Morning, made the pinnacle 5 Western ballads in 1982, and by way of 1983 he became able to combine all his passions into one. What can we mean? The legendary United States of America musician Eddie Rabbitt typically headlined the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, but in 1983 he fell sick and George needed to fill in for him. This marked any other boom in George's profession, and it appeared that whatever he touched grew to become to gold. He even went on a run of 5 tasks that hit the #1 spot on Billboard from 1983 to 1984. From being willing to cease music around 1981, George won the Country Music Award for Top Male Vocalist. Along with his projects continuing to hit the #1 spot. As his profession grew, his wife persisted to provide balance on the home front. Because her husband changed into going to be away for most of the time, Norma selected to forego a career simply so she might be with the youngsters always. She became a supportive spouse to her husband and protecting mom to her youngsters. She paid attention to the needs of her own family, and due to her, they thrive. Strait even gained the Country Music Award for the Pinnacle Male Vocalist again. it become an exceptional victory for him, but it was something he would sacrifice if he ought to opposite the tragedy that broke his spouse and him. Norma tried as great as she could to hold tabs on her youngsters. As her first infant, Jessica, grew up and had become 13, she had many pals. Norma and her husband attempted to screen who her pals had been, and they preferred the ones she associated with, so while she desired to go out in 1986, her mother and father did not see why now not. They allowed her to exit along with her friends. At 13, the idea their daughter had to sense a few degree of independence. Unfortunately, that night in 1986 would be the final time they might see their daughter alive.